Hey everyone! In this video, I want to talk to you about a fantastic way to build WordPress websites. It begins with a starter theme I've discovered about 2 years ago called Flynt. Flynt is not your average theme or site builder. It's a starter theme for developers that want to efficiently build custom sites. So if you're looking for a path to get better at developing with WordPress, want to write maintainable code, and provide a good admin experience for your editors,
this is the way.
In the next few minutes, I'll tell you about what makes Flynt great, then show you how your content editor's workflow is going to look like, and last but not least, show you insights into how the theme's code looks in practice. So let's get started. The main paradigm when building with Flynt is breaking down your sites into smaller parts, the components. So if you're looking at your site, try to identify the elements that make it up. For example, here on the Flynt website, I see the logo, the main navigation, and a content section containing an image besides the text. Treating all of these elements as their own little things breaks down your code for logic, styling, and interactivity into smaller packages that can be quickly understood and reused on one site, or also easily be copied to the next site you're building. Flynt's a starter theme and a theme for developers. What does it actually mean? So it's a starting point for practical best practices, theme setup, and tooling to make your life easier. Opposite to some well-known end-user themes like Divi or Avada or Enfold that focus on letting you build your site without coding, it doesn't provide a ton of ready-to-use elements, but instead only a good basic set of components that you may fully customize, remove if you don't need them, and for sure add new ones yourself. So the idea is to ship something tailored to your needs instead of unused bloat. And one of the best things, it doesn't invent a lot of new things, but rather combines some very well-known, widely used developer tools for WordPress in a hassle-free way. So the main ingredients of Flynt are Advanced Custom Fields, or ACF, for data input and output, Timber and Twig for good data handling and templating, web components in native JavaScript, and Sass to write efficient CSS, and a bunch of great tooling that makes your life as a developer happy because it just works and works and works. And by the way, Flynt was built by Bleach, an agency from Berlin, Germany that needed an efficient solution to create great WordPress websites and shared it with the world. Thanks 1,000 times, guys. So let's quickly look into WP Admin in order to better understand how the editor experience and the concept of components work. When I'm editing a page with Flynt, you'll see that the native WordPress editor Gutenberg is removed and replaced by a component-based editor. This editor is actually not much more than ACF's flexible content field. It allows me to quickly add new components, move their order with drag and drop, and of course, editing the content of my pages and posts. As you can see, the actual fields and interface that is displayed for each component has been custom tailored to what it needs. This is a big plus of the concept in my experience with content editors. The interface may not be fancy, but it can be quickly understood and used by clients without a steep learning curve. Now, enough of the theoretical talk. Let's dive into code. I've opened up the Flynt theme directory in my VS Code. you'll find the familiar WordPress theme core ingredients. So we see index.php, page.php, style.css. I assume you've already met them elsewhere. Let's not yet get into much more detail about the theme in general, but focus on one interesting directory, components. When developing our site, we'll probably be spending most of the time working on components. So let's now see how these are built. Let's look at the image slider component that we've just used as an example. It shows the core files that a component can have. A functions.php file that contains the definition of the ACF fields that are shown in the admin area. It's also the place where you can fetch and modify your data before it gets passed on to the next step. In index.twig, you're going to write the HTML that is later rendered when your component is shown to the visitor of your site. It's written in HTML, flavored with the Twig templating language which makes juggling with data quite easy. Further, we have a style.scss file. This is where all the CSS styling of this individual component is defined. It's written in Sass, which is just plain CSS with a few additional tricks, like nesting, to make its development more joyful. It will later be compiled into standard CSS. At last, but not least, script.js. In here, we can let our component do things interactively. For example, letting our bunch of images turn into a slider. Each component that contains JavaScript turned into a standard web component and provides a familiar way to work with. So let's now go through these files and see what they contain in more detail. Functions.php. This file first defines a custom PHP namespace for each component in order to prevent conflicts with other components. Next to it, we see the getACF layout function, where all of our data fields are defined that will show up on the content editor screen in WP-admin. Let's quickly open up WP-admin side by side to have a look at a few fields. For example, we have the title field, which is a WYSIWYG type of field that lets you enter richly formatted text or even media. That will be displayed with the TinyMC editor inside WordPress admin. Second, we have the images field, which is a ACF gallery field that allows you to add a bunch of images real quick. Thankfully, we don't have to remember all of these by heart, but you can use Flynt's VS Code Snippets plugin to insert example definitions. Now let's go into the next file, index.twig. In here, we are going to prepare our HTML. All of our data fields that are defined in functions.php getACF layout function are automatically available here. Remember how we defined the images field that holds our slider images? That's what is accessed here on line 11. We're using loop function of Twig to loop over all the images in that field. Technically, the images field returns an array, so we're looping over all array items. We then output an image tag for each of our images. Further below, we're adding some next and previous buttons to control our slider. Of course, so far, our slider component wouldn't really do anything but output a list of images, since we didn't add any JavaScript or CSS. So let's quickly look at an important detail here in our Twig template. If we look closely, we can see that our outermost div contains an isFlyntSliderImages attribute. This is used inside script.js to define a standard web component. What that means is that we have now created a new and reusable JavaScript block on our website. Once that component is loaded on a page, the constructor is called, which initializes our JavaScript slider. I will not go into much more detail here, since this is custom for every component. But to give you a quick overview, we see that the swiper slider is important here. We're finding some DOM elements and are initializing the swiper slider on them. So far, so good. We've added some fields to add data, output that data to HTML with a little help of Twig, and then turned into a neat image slider. Now let's make it pretty. When we look at style CSS, we see the CSS selector is targeting the same is Flynt slider images element. All of our styling is then typically written inside it, which means it's scoped by that component and will not accidentally style any other parts of your site. Since we're all writing custom code, this all generally means that you can write really low specificity CSS, which makes your life, again, less painful and a lot more joyful. That's about it for a basic component. There can also be components that are only used in your layout, not in WP admin, such as your navigation or footer, for example. And of course, there's lots of other things to be said and seen about Flynt, but I'll finish here for the moment. If this made you curious, then let me share 3 helpful links for finding more about Flynt. First is the Flynt website that has some good introductions about its core concepts and setup. So you should definitely go read these to get started easier. Second is the Flynt GitHub repo README that also explains some ideas more practically and of course lets you download the code. And third, if you're stuck with a problem or have some ideas, then please share them in Flynt's discussion board on GitHub and become a part of the small but neat community. So please let me know in the comments if you found this video interesting or helpful. And hit the thumbs up button if you liked it. I'll hopefully produce some more content on practically creating components with Flynt in the future. Bye bye.